When struggling author Ethan Wilder inherits his uncle's lonely house in a fog-choked Oregon lumber town, he expects silence, solitude, and a second chance at life. What he finds instead is a photograph of himself as a child, one he never posed for, left on his porch by someone who knows he has returned. As old disappearances resurface and a figure begins watching him from the tree line, Ethan realizes the town didn't forget him. It's been waiting. The one who got away. Ethan Wilder didn't plan to return to Briars Hollow. The town had been a forgotten corner of Oregon's fog-drenched coast, a place he once escaped with the determination of someone sprinting from a burning building. And yet, on the morning he received the letter about the house, an inheritance from an uncle he barely remembered, the first thing he felt wasn't hesitation. It was something closer to relief. Relief that maybe, just maybe, the house would give him the one thing his life had been starving for, a reset. He arrived just after dawn, tires crackling over the graveled road as the fog pressed down like a heavy hand. The old lumber town looked the same as it had in his childhood memories, tall cedar trees shivering against the gray sky, abandoned logging trucks rusting in open lots. The whistle of the mill long gone silent. Briars Hollow felt frozen in time, suspended in a kind of melancholic pause, the kind of place where you whispered without knowing why. The house stood on the edge of town, at the end of a steep incline where the forest thickened. A two-story craftsman with dark wood siding, a porch sagging from years of rain, and windows so clouded they looked blind. Ethan stepped out of the car and inhaled the scent of damp earth, fir trees, and something faintly metallic, the kind of smell you associated with old lumber mills and colder nights. He held the key tightly, feeling the chill through the brass. Maybe it was the exhaustion talking, or the fact that his last book had sold less than 200 copies, or that his father died with the look of disappointment still carved into his eyes. But standing in front of that house, Ethan felt a strange pull, a gravity, something familiar, yet unsettling. He opened the front door. It resisted for a moment, swelling from the moisture, before groaning open. The interior smelled like dust and old varnish. Shafts of fog-filtered light slipped through the windows, illuminating the living room in muted gray. Wooden floors creaked under his steps, the house speaking in tired whispers. There were boxes stacked near the wall, old belongings from his uncle's life, untouched. A dried-up fern drooped in a ceramic pot. A mantel clock ticked, even though he couldn't remember winding it. He hesitated. "Hello?" His voice bounced off the walls, thinner than he expected. He didn't know why he said it. No one was supposed to be here. He spent the next hour walking through the rooms, opening cabinets, checking drawers, testing light switches that flickered weakly. The house was old, older than he remembered visiting as a child. But there was something else too, a heaviness that clung to the walls, like it was holding his breath. Upstairs, the hallway was darker, narrow. The floorboards felt different under his steps, like they were following him, watching him. When he opened the door to the master bedroom, a rush of cold air brushed against his knees. Not the normal temperature drop of an unused room. This felt purposeful, like exhaled breath. He flicked on the light. It buzzed, flickered, then steadied. That's when he saw it. On the far wall, above the headboard, hung a framed photograph of a group of lumber workers standing in front of a timber truck, their expressions stern, their boots soaked in mud. But it wasn't the men that unsettled him. It was the background. Behind them, where the fog was thick and swirling, something dark lurked between the trees. A shape, tall, not quite human.
Ethan stepped closer, pulse hitching. He lifted the frame off the wall to get a better look. As he moved it, something slipped from behind the photograph. A folded newspaper clipping, yellowed at the edges. He crouched, picking it up carefully. Local boy vanishes near Old Mill Road. No trace found. 1997. A chill slid down Ethan's spine. He had been 10 years old in 1997. He remembered that year vividly, not because of the missing boy, which his parents had tried to shield him from, but because that was the same summer they abruptly stopped letting him play outside after dark. That was the summer they moved him away from Briar's Hollow for a better environment. The kind of vague explanation that made no sense to a child, but made perfect sense to an adult recalling it decades later. He read the article. A boy named Thomas Avery had gone missing in the woods behind the mill. Search teams combed the area for weeks. No leads, no clues. Eventually, the case went cold. Ethan folded the clipping back, unease prickling at the base of his neck. Why was this hidden behind a bedroom photo? Why did his uncle keep it? The air felt heavier now, like the house had shifted around him. He moved back downstairs, needing space, needing air. He stepped out onto the porch, letting the fog settle around him. It was thicker now, rolling in from the forest, swallowing the tree line. And through it, he could hear something faint, a slow, rhythmic tapping, like metal striking wood, far away, then stopping, then repeating. He held his breath, listened. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded deliberate, patterned. He glanced toward the road, but visibility was low. The fog made the whole world feel close, suffocating, like someone had wrapped the town in cotton. He shook it off. "Get a grip," he muttered. As he walked back inside, his phone buzzed. He hadn't expected service here. The screen lit up with a number he didn't know. When he answered, he was met with static, a faint crackle, then a voice, low and strained, barely cutting through the interference. "Don't stay in that house." He froze. "Who is this?" The static grew louder, more distorted. Then the voice whispered one last thing, clearer than before. "You weren't supposed to come back." The call cut. Ethan lowered the phone slowly, his hand trembling. A metallic taste filled his mouth. Fear or adrenaline, he couldn't tell. He checked the number. No caller ID. He tried calling back. It didn't ring. Didn't connect. Not even a failed tone. Just nothing. He paced the living room, tension tightening around his ribs. His mind raced. Was it a prank? A wrong number? A coincidence? But he knew better. The voice said it with intention, with knowledge. He wandered to the kitchen, needing water, needing something to ground him. As he filled a glass, his eyes caught on a stack of letters pinned to a corkboard by the fridge, all addressed to his uncle, all unopened, all from the same sender. Briar's Hollow Sheriff's Department, Missing Persons Division. A pulse of dread surged through him. He pulled one letter off the board, tearing the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a case number, a request for confirmation, a note at the bottom. "Mr. Wilder, please respond as soon as possible regarding the sightings near your property line."
Sightings? He swallowed hard. Another letter. Another. Each one more urgent, more insistent. "We have reason to believe someone has been watching your home. Multiple locals reported a figure in your second-floor window. Please contact us immediately." His heart thudded. His uncle had been living alone, sick, according to the estate attorney. But this was something else. Ethan's breathing quickened as he stepped backward, trying to make sense of the puzzle laid out in front of him. A missing boy from his childhood, unopened letters about sightings, a disturbing figure in a photograph, a warning phone call from an unknown voice, and then the sound again. Tap, tap, tap. Closer now. He froze, listening. The tapping was coming from the side of the house. Slow, deliberate, metallic. He forced himself to move toward the window, each step echoing in the quiet house. He wiped a patch of condensation from the glass with the edge of his sleeve. At first, he saw nothing, just fog, thick, swirling, unbroken. Then, movement. A figure emerged from the haze, tall, still, standing near the tree line, not approaching, not retreating, just watching. Ethan stumbled backward, heart slamming against his ribs. His hand shook as he reached for his phone. No signal. The tapping stopped. The figure didn't. It remained there, half swallowed by fog, unmoving, a shadow with no features. Then, slowly, too slowly, it lifted its arm and pointed directly at him. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He blinked once, twice, and the figure was gone. The fog swallowed everything. Silence returned, but the dread did not. Ethan backed away from the window, pulse racing. He didn't know if he imagined it, if the fog was playing tricks, or if stress and lack of sleep were catching up with him. But deep down, in the part of him that still remembered being a frightened 10-year-old boy in this town, he knew it wasn't his imagination. Not here, not in Briar Hollow. He grabbed his coat and keys and hurried toward the door. He needed to leave the house just for a moment, get fresh air, go into town, find someone, anyone who could explain what the hell was happening. But when he pulled the door open, something slid across the porch floor. A small object, light, carried by the breeze. He bent down, picking it up. A photograph. Old, water-stained, the edges curled from age. It showed a boy, a child around 10 years old, standing in front of a tree stump, smiling shyly at the camera, mud on his jeans, a flannel shirt, a single missing tooth. Ethan stared, throat tightening. He knew that face. He remembered those eyes. It was him. A photo of Ethan Wilder at 10 years old. He flipped it over with trembling fingers. On the back, written in faded ink, "The one who got away." Ethan staggered backward, breath ripped from his lungs. The fog thickened around the house. Something shifted in the distance. And for the first time since arriving in Briar Hollow, Ethan understood he wasn't just here to inherit a house. He was here because something had been waiting for him. Ethan stood frozen on the porch, the old photograph trembling between his fingers as if it held a faint pulse of its own. Fog wrapped around him like a tightening fist, swallowing the yard, the road, even the tree line where that figure had stood moments ago. His breath came out in uneven bursts, mixing with the cold morning air. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the writing on the back of the photo. The one who got away. It didn't make sense. Nobody outside his family even owned pictures of him at that age, let alone some candid shot in the woods. But this wasn't just a picture. It was a message, and whoever left it
had been close enough to place it on his porch, close enough to watch him, and bold enough not to hide it. Ethan swallowed the rising panic and looked around again. The silence felt sharper now, like the fog muted the entire town just so he could hear the pounding of his own heartbeat. He forced himself down the steps, boots thudding softly on damp wood. He needed answers. He needed someone who remembered this place, someone who remembered his uncle, someone who might remember him. The only place that made sense was town. He slid into his car, still gripping the photograph like it might vanish if he loosened his hold. When he turned the engine, the radio crackled to life, static first, then a soft whisper of a voice, before dissolving again into noise. His skin prickled. He switched it off immediately. The drive into Briar's Hollow's small downtown took only 5 minutes. The fog thinned slightly near the center of town, revealing old brick buildings, a shuttered mill office, a diner with flickering neon, and a grocery store with faded paint. The lumber mill itself was a looming, rotting skeleton in the distance, its metal siding covered with rust and moss, its smokestacks pointing toward the sky like accusing fingers. He parked near the diner. Inside, warmth washed over him. Yellow lights, clinking dishes, the murmur of conversation. The normalcy of it all felt almost disorienting. A few heads turned when he walked in, curious but not hostile, the kind of look small towns gave to unfamiliar faces or familiar ones they hadn't seen in a long time. An older waitress behind the counter paused mid-pour, eyes widening slightly. Ethan recognized her. Mrs. Weaver. She had been his neighbor when he was a kid. Her hair had gone silver, but her expression was the same, sharp, observant, almost too perceptive. "Well," she said softly, setting down the coffee pot. "I'll be damned. Ethan Wilder." He forced a smile. "Hey, Mrs. Weaver." She came closer, her glasses sliding down her nose as she leaned in. "I heard you were back. Never thought I'd see you walking through that door." "Guess life takes you strange places," Ethan murmured.
She gave him a long, searching look. "Your uncle's house still standing?" "Barely," he said, trying to sound light. "I'm staying there now." Her eyes flicked downward and her jaw tightened. "You shouldn't be." The words cut through him like ice. Before he could respond, she motioned him to follow her to a booth in the corner. He slid in. She sat across from him and folded her hands tightly. "You planning to fix it up? Sell it?" she asked. "I haven't decided. Honestly, I'm just trying to understand what happened to him." Mrs. Weaver hesitated. "He wasn't well toward the end, Ethan. Stayed in that house more than he should have. But your uncle wasn't crazy, not the way people like to gossip." Ethan felt the photograph inside his jacket pocket, the edges pressing sharply into his ribs. "Did he ever mention sightings?" Her eyes snapped up. "So you found the letters?" He stiffened. "You knew about them?" "Everyone knew," she whispered. Sheriff kept asking him about what he'd seen, about what he swore was coming back. Ethan's chest tightened. Coming back? What does that mean? But Mrs. Weaver didn't answer that. Instead, she reached across the table, gripping his wrist firmly. "Listen to me. Don't stay in that house alone. Not at night, not this week." "Why? What happens this week?" "Same thing that happened 27 years ago." A cold, creeping dread slid up Ethan's spine. 1997. The year the Avery boy vanished. The year Ethan was suddenly pulled out of town without explanation. The year his childhood ended without him realizing it. Ethan leaned forward. "Mrs. Weaver, do you remember a boy going missing? Thomas Avery?"
The diner went quiet around them, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. She exhaled slowly. Nobody here forgets Thomas Avery, but we don't talk about him anymore. I saw something today in the fog, a figure watching me, and someone left a photograph of me on the porch, a picture of me at 10 years old. Mrs. Weaver's face drained of color. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. Her voice broke into a whisper. They came back for you. Ethan froze. Who? Before she could answer, a heavy-set man sitting 2 booths down got up, walked over, and stood beside their table. His shadow fell over both of them. Sheriff Callum Hayes. He remembered him. Not well, but enough to recall that Hayes had been a deputy back in 1997. Ethan Wilder. Heard you were back. We need to talk. Mrs. Weaver stood up immediately. Sheriff, he just got here. Let him eat. Hayes ignored her. His eyes stayed locked on Ethan. I got a call this morning. Someone reported movement on your property line. Thought it was an intruder. You see anything unusual? I saw someone, tall, in the fog, watching the house. Sheriff Hayes's jaw moved, but he didn't seem surprised. Not even a little. What time? He asked. Around 7. The sheriff inhaled through his nose, then exhaled slowly as if bracing himself. That's when the fog is thickest. That's when most sightings happen. Ethan's stomach dropped. Sightings of what? Hayes hesitated. Mrs. Weaver didn't. Of the same figure your uncle spent his last years trying to warn us about. The same one people saw in 1997. The diner felt suddenly colder. Hayes shot her a look. You know better than to scare him with rumors. Rumors don't leave pictures on porches. Hayes stiffened. Pictures? Ethan pulled the photograph from his jacket and placed it on the table. The sheriff stared at it. Not with confusion, not with curiosity, but with recognition. His lips tightened. Where exactly did you find this? On my porch, before the figure disappeared. The sheriff's posture changed, almost imperceptibly. He wasn't just tense, he was afraid. He picked up the photo, holding it gently between 2 fingers. This shouldn't exist. Ethan leaned forward. What do you mean? Hayes shook his head. Your family left town before we ever finished the search for Thomas Avery, before we managed to get answers, and before we could ask you what you saw. What I saw? I was 10. You were also the last person seen near the Avery boy before he vanished. The words slammed into Ethan like a physical impact. What? He breathed. Mrs. Weaver looked away, guilt tightening her features. Hayes continued, his voice hardening. You were playing near the Mill Road. Folks told us you two had been exploring out there, together. Then you came home alone. Ethan's memory twisted, foggy flashes of trees, laughter, a game of hide and seek, but nothing clear, nothing concrete. I don't remember any of that. Hayes nodded slowly. Trauma does that. Ethan shook his head. You're saying I was with him when he disappeared? I'm saying, Hayes said, looking again at the photo, that you were the last one who got away. The diner felt unbearably still. Ethan's pulse thrummed in his ears. The sheriff lowered the photograph to the table. That figure you saw, he said quietly, it doesn't follow just anyone. Ethan swallowed. Then who does it follow? Hayes met his eyes with a grim certainty. Those it wasn't finished with.
Ethan felt the world tilt, just slightly, just enough to make his breath thin, because the sheriff's words didn't feel like a threat. They felt like a memory. Fog curled outside the diner windows, pressing against the glass as if listening.
The low murmur of other customers had grown quieter. People were watching without watching, pretending not to stare while holding their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Sheriff Hayes slid into the booth across from Ethan, the vinyl seat groaning under his weight. He placed the old photo between them like evidence in an interrogation. "We'll talk at the station," he said, rising. "No," Ethan said sharply. His own voice startled him. "You said I was the last one who got away. You can't just drop something like that and walk out." Sheriff Hayes glared at him. "This isn't the place." Mrs. Weaver planted her feet, blocking the sheriff's path. "This is exactly the place, Callum. The boy deserves the truth." The sheriff rubbed his forehead. "I've got half the town on edge and missing person cases going back decades. The last thing I need is panic." "That isn't your decision anymore," Mrs. Weaver shot back. "He's back, and so is it." The moment the word left her mouth, the diner lights flickered, once, twice, before settling into a dim, uneasy glow. Ethan swallowed the knot in his throat. What is it? A person? An animal? Something worse? Mrs. Weaver looked at him with eyes filled with pity. If it were a person, the sheriff would have arrested them years ago. Sheriff Hayes snapped. "That's enough." "No, Callum. Tell him, before the woods do." Ethan felt a cold pressure building behind his ribs. "Tell me what?" The sheriff finally sat again, hands clasped, jaw tight. "You want the truth, Ethan? Fine. But you don't get to panic halfway through it." "I'm listening." He exhaled. "It started with footprints." Mrs. Weaver nodded. "Large ones. Too large to be human. But shaped like they were. Too long, too narrow. A gait that didn't match any animal documented in this region." Ethan rubbed his arms, a chill settling into him. "And people saw the figure?" Hayes paused. "Not clearly. Always in fog. Always at a distance. That's why half the town said it was imagination, local hysteria. But then," Mrs. Weaver whispered the rest, "then children began disappearing." Ethan felt his pulse spike. Hayes continued, quieter now. "It always happened in thick fog. Never a scream, never a struggle. Just a missing child and those footprints leading into the timberline. And once we found drag marks." Ethan's stomach dropped. He folded his hands tighter. "Your family left the same week Thomas Avery vanished. You know why, Ethan?" He shook his head slowly. Mrs. Weaver's voice softened. "Because your mother saw something in the woods that day. She swore it wasn't a man." Ethan's breath caught, a fogged memory tugging at the edges of his mind. His mother pulling him inside, her hands shaking, whispering, "Don't look back, baby. Don't look back." "But," Ethan asked, voice barely steady, "why me? Why did that thing come to the house? Why leave this picture?" Sheriff Hayes tapped a finger on the photo. "That's what we need to figure out." Ethan leaned back, tension biting into his spine. "And you think it's related to Thomas Avery?" Hayes didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "The Avery boy wasn't the first." Mrs. Weaver added, "But he should have been the last." The diner grew colder, as if the temperature dropped 5 degrees in an instant. Outside, the fog thickened again, pressing up the windows, swirling in slow, unnatural patterns. Ethan felt the pressure of unseen eyes. "Okay," Ethan said, "if this thing takes children, what does it want with me now? I'm an adult." Mrs. Weaver's eyes glistened with something like fear. "It doesn't take children because they're children. It takes those it marks." "And you," Hayes said, tapping the photo again, "were marked once." Ethan stared at the image, his younger self smiling, unaware, the forest behind him a wall of shadows. A memory shuddered through him. a tree stump, a dare, a friend's laughter, a shape moving behind the fog. But the memory dissolved before he could grasp it. Hayes stood abruptly. "You're coming with me." Ethan stiffened. "Where?" "To your uncle's house." Mrs. Weaver grabbed the sheriff's arm. "Callum, no, not today, not with the fog like this." Hayes shook her off. "If something's coming after him, we need to see what it wants." Ethan blinked. "You want to use me as bait?" Hayes didn't confirm. He didn't deny either. He simply said, "Grab your coat." Ethan hesitated, every instinct screaming to stay in the diner, stay in the warm light, stay where people existed. But something in the sheriff's eyes told him this wasn't a choice. Mrs. Weaver pressed something into Ethan's hand before he left. A small wooden token carved in the shape of an eye. "Keep this close," she whispered. "Your uncle carried it everywhere." Ethan glanced at it, primitive, strange, unsettling, but thanked her and placed it in his pocket. The sheriff opened the diner door. Fog swept in instantly, cold, heavy, alive. It curled around their legs, tasted the air like a tongue. "Let's go," Hayes said. Ethan stepped outside, following the sheriff toward the cruiser parked under the flickering street lamp. That's when he saw it. Across the street, half hidden in the fog. Tall, still, watching. The same figure. But this time, it wasn't silent. It raised its arm again, slow, deliberate, and pointed at him. Sheriff Hayes saw Ethan freeze and turn toward the fog. "Where?" he muttered. "What are you seeing?" Ethan couldn't speak. The figure stood motionless. Then its head tilted, an unnatural, slow tilt, like its neck wasn't built to move that way. Hayes stepped forward, hand on his holster. "Show yourself." The figure didn't move, didn't retreat, didn't run. It simply dissolved, drifting backward into the fog, melting into the white until nothing remained. Hayes cursed under his breath. "Get in the car." Ethan dropped into the passenger seat, heart pounding hard enough to hurt. The sheriff sped toward Mill Road, lights off, fog thick as wool. Ethan clutched the wooden eye in his pocket, the edges digging into his palm. "Sheriff," he whispered, "what happens if something marked comes back after 27 years? Hayes' grip tightened on the wheel. "We pray it came alone." But Hayes inhaled deeply, eyes fixed on the suffocating fog ahead. "But if it didn't?" He looked at Ethan. "Then something else is coming for you, too." The car cut through the fog like a knife, headlights barely piercing the gray soup that had swallowed Briar's Hollow. Ethan gripped the edge of the seat so tightly his knuckles whitened, eyes darting between the road, the fog, and the silent sheriff beside him. Mill Road stretched ahead, narrow, cracked asphalt, flanked by dense cedar and fir, the kind of trees that seemed to lean closer as if they were listening. Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together everything he'd learned in the past few hours. The missing children, the letters, the photograph, the warnings, the figure in the fog, the wooden token Mrs. Weaver had pressed into his hand. It was too much, too fast, and yet, deep down, he felt the house wasn't the real danger. Whatever had been watching him, whatever had marked him, was patient. It had waited 27 years, and now it had come for him. The sheriff's voice cut through his thoughts. "Your uncle believed this was cyclical. Every generation it comes back, targets those it thinks can escape it." He didn't finish the sentence, but Ethan understood anyway. You survived once, but survival doesn't guarantee safety forever. Ethan swallowed. How do you fight something like that? Hayes shook his head. We don't. We just survive it long enough to understand it. The silence that followed was heavier than the fog, punctuated only by the hum of the tires over the old asphalt. Then a sound, a tapping, soft, deliberate, from the edge of the road, a rhythm that froze Ethan in place. Not wood on wood, not stone, something else, metallic, hollow, close. Ethan glanced toward the fog-shrouded tree line. His stomach flipped. There it was, a shadow, taller than a man, moving unnaturally, watching, waiting. He wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but the sheriff's hand on the wheel held him in place. Hayes hadn't flinched, but his jaw was tight, his eyes hard. You see it too, he whispered. The sheriff nodded slowly. It's testing you, seeing if you remember, seeing if you react. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. Test me. Why? Hayes exhaled. Because it doesn't just want to watch anymore. It wants acknowledgement, recognition, and it knows you remember more than you think. The car slowed as they approached the driveway to the house. The fog seemed to thicken, pressing against the windshield, seeping under the doors, curling around the tires like smoke. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the figure again, but it was gone. Not gone. Hidden, waiting. The house emerged from the fog like a dark memory. The porch sagged, the windows blind and cloudy. The front door was closed, unwelcoming, holding secrets. Ethan's stomach nodded as he realized he didn't know if he wanted to step inside again. Not after the photograph, not after the tapping, not after the warnings. Hayes killed the engine. Stay here, he said, voice low. I'll check the perimeter first. Just don't move. Before he could protest, Hayes disappeared into the fog, flashlight in hand. The beam cut weakly through the white, moving slowly along the trees and the edges of the property. Ethan sat frozen, every instinct screaming. The house seemed alive now, its wooden siding groaning softly under the weight of years and the wind and the fog. Shadows shifted inside the windows, but he wasn't sure if it was reflection, imagination, or something else. Then a sound from behind, the slow creak of the front door. He hadn't touched it. He hadn't opened it. His pulse leapt.
Ethan reached for the wooden eye in his pocket. Cold, heavy, oddly comforting. As he pressed it to his chest, the air seemed to tighten around him, almost humming. The door creaked again, and then it stopped. A whisper followed. His name. Ethan. He froze. The voice was soft, faint, almost carried by the fog itself. Not a memory, not his own thoughts. Someone or something was inside the house, and it knew him, knew his fears, knew the photo, the letters, the warnings, knew everything. He wanted to run, wanted to call out for Hayes, but something rooted him in place, a mixture of dread and curiosity. He had to know what was in that house. He had to face it. The front porch steps groaned under invisible weight. The whisper came again, clearer this time. Ethan, remember. The word hung in the fog like a command. A memory flickered. Him at 10 years old, laughing with another boy in the woods, the fog rolling in around them, the laughter cutting off suddenly. A shadow, tall, still, watching. Ethan's breath caught.
The memory merged with the present. The figure in the fog, the photograph, the letters, everything his uncle had feared, everything Briar's Hollow had tried to forget. It was all true, all waiting, and it wasn't done with him yet. A step from the porch. Another. The whisper now multiple voices, layered, echoing, not just calling his name, calling him back, pulling him in, into the house, into the memory, into the fog. Ethan's fingers clenched the wooden token. His mind screamed to resist, but the pull was too strong, too familiar. It felt like the house itself exhaling, breathing around him, inviting him into a past he didn't fully remember. And then the porch floor shuddered, faint at first, then with violent tremors. Something heavy was moving inside, something alive, something patient that had waited decades for him to return. Ethan realized with a cold certainty that this was no longer just about his uncle, no longer about missing children or letters. It was about him. Only him. The fog pressed closer, cold and wet. The whispering grew louder, urgent, pleading, commanding. Ethan took a step forward, then another. His hand on the doorknob, cold metal, trembling, heart hammering, fog swirling, whispers rising. And then he heard a second sound behind him. Not the sheriff, not the wind, something heavier. Footsteps outside the house, in the fog. Ethan turned. Nothing. Only the fog, curling around the trees. But he knew. He knew it wasn't alone. The figure hadn't left. It had waited. And now, it was ready.